Here, let me get our recording going. We maybe should have gotten some of that down for you all to reference back later if you need to. Oh my goodness, my children are being elephants above my head. Sorry, folks. And for Ashley too. Hopefully if Ashley's got any questions, we can fill her in on PTEP paperwork. The joys of PTEP paperwork. Oh, all right. Well, it is lovely to see you all back. I hope that you were able to get some rest over spring break. I know many of us were still working in one way or another over break, but I hope you made at least a little time for rest. And I was saying to a class yesterday, I feel like it depends on the day when I look at my calendar, if I feel like the end of the semester is like here, or if there's like kind of a long time till the end. So from day to day, I hope you're able to pace yourself with however much work you have left and what the next couple weeks look like here. Somewhat related to that, you may have noticed in Canvas that over spring break, I got grades all up to date finally. And now as of last night, I'm behind again because you turned things in last night. And now tonight you have some more coming in, but I was up to date on grades. Please go in and double check me. And even if you got 100 on something, sometimes I still type a comment in the rubric, just a little bit of feedback, or if you like asked a question in your after class reflection, maybe I answered the question for you or tried to answer it in the rubric. So even if you get 100, I encourage you to go open up those rubrics at some point and just look at the feedback that's there. And particularly related to field experience, make sure you check out what's there. The majority of the class at the moment are not up to the number of hours that I'm trying to get you up to. You know, we're more than halfway through the semester. You should be more than 10 hours on 4/9, 2 weeks from today. You should be at 15 hours is where I'm pushing you to be. So for real, think about like if you're at 10-ish hours, you've got to earn between 2 and 3 hours a week to be able to get to 20 by the end of the semester. So it might be time to do a little bit of that math and help pace yourself, because that's one that unfortunately I have no wiggle room on currently. If you don't have 20 hours, you don't pass the class. Like even if you had an A+ on everything else, if you don't get 20 hours of field experience, I can't pass you. So please, please, please be attentive to those field experience hours. Let me know if you need help. Let me know if there are issues going on, but try to keep working diligently on those. Okay. And I said, and also in addition to just opening rubrics, if I made any mistakes on grades, if there's anywhere that I made a mistake on a grade or had said I was going to give you an extension and I forgot and I counted points off, something like that, please let me know, because I definitely make mistakes. So feel free to check me and call me on it. Any questions about grades or field experience in particular? Nope. Cool. There's a couple other things related to assignments that we'll talk about a little later in class. Let's dive into somebody else talking other than me. So I meant to have you watch this video before class today, and then it just didn't happen in life. I'm sure you're terribly disappointed. So we're going to go ahead and spend 9 minutes here together watching this video. Whoops, except that I forgot to hit share sound. Apologies. Let me share my sound as well. Here we go. So 9 minutes isn't terribly long, right? We can handle that together. And we will talk about the things that are brought up in this video once it's done. So you don't necessarily have to take notes, but it might be helpful for your brain to just jot a few things down as the video is going on, things that are brought up that are new to you or that are particularly intriguing to you or that you disagree with. Maybe make some notes of those as the video is going on. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Dr. Robert Gardner, Associate Professor of Music Education at the Pennsylvania State University. I'd like to talk to you about teaching eclectic styles of music in your instrumental ensembles. Bands and orchestras have a long history in our culture, both in performance and in our music education systems in our schools. One of the benefits of this long history is we have a large repertoire of music to perform, classic repertoire by great composers, often referred to as the canon. We that teach band and orchestra in the schools are very proud of this tradition. However, we should acknowledge that the format and the repertoire can have a limiting experience on our students. In other words, learning only music, only classical music in the band and orchestra formats can give one type of experience for our students. Learning varied styles of music within this format can enhance students' musical understanding and their technical abilities as well. So I'd like to go through several aspects of teaching eclectic styles of music to band and orchestra students that can be very beneficial for them. First of all, remember that all styles of music are taught within a genre, and that musicians can learn to be multi-musical. In other words, they can learn to perform in different styles of music on the same instrument. We always learn the performance practices within a genre and the rules that are followed within that genre. And students can learn different techniques related to each genre so that they can learn a wider variety of techniques, and they can also learn different skills such as composing or improvising within those genres. Learning about a musical genre is also learning about a musical culture. The musical genres are understood by those who perform them and observe them, and learning a new style brings a whole nother set of cultural rules that go along with it. This can allow students to view concepts and issues from a different perspective that they're normally used to. They can also learn styles that they haven't been familiar with in the past, which can enhance their musical learning. Authenticity in performance is a big issue when learning other styles of music. Teachers are often not trained in other styles of music and don't always feel confident in teaching about them. And this concern is a good one because we do want to teach the music as authentically as possible. However, be careful, authenticity is not a black and white issue. Authenticity exists on a continuum. Therefore, we should strive to be as authentic as possible, but it's not always possible to be perfectly authentic. For example, if you're performing jazz music in a high school at 8 o'clock in the morning in a school, you're not technically being totally authentic. Also, playing jazz music on stringed instruments is a little inauthentic, but still can be done very authentically anyway. Learning other styles of music can enhance an active and individual participation. The traditional format of band and orchestra is often led by a conductor who dictates the information to the students. However, other styles of music can be more interactive, and students can make decisions individually as they're learning about it. So if we want our students to be more independent as musicians and do things with their musical skills later on in life, we should explore some formats that encourage them to make these decisions on their own and to interact with each other. Teachers, in order to do this, need to abandon their expert role and be willing to learn along with the students as you're exploring different styles of music. But that can be very beneficial for us teachers as well. Also, we should try to have our students interact with guest performers who are experts in these styles of music, and they can make connections with the students that can go well beyond the classroom. I'd like to talk about the difference between rehearsing and jamming. The concept of rehearsal within classical music is a very formal one, but other styles of music, this concept is different, the idea of jamming. It's a colloquial term, but it represents a little different format of performing music and rehearsing music. It's less formal and it's more interactive, and it's excellent for a learning environment. Jamming encourages individual creativity and leadership as well within the styles. And jamming also tends to encourage practicing. Students try out new things in a new genre, and they are encouraged to go home and work on these skills that they haven't been able to use before. Speaking of working with guest artists, this can be a great way to learn about new styles of music if you're not an expert in them. Which guest artists you work with is a big question. I'd encourage you to try to work with the most well-known guest artists in your area, and don't be afraid to ask them. The worst that they can say is no. In fact, you'll often be surprised at how willing guest artists are to work for very little money in order to share their music with your students. They really enjoy sharing that music and new knowledge, particularly if students have never heard about the style. Of course, this does also require us teachers to relinquish the control in the classroom and be a learning participant along with them. But you aren't giving up your only role, because the guest artists often do not have knowledge of students' learning or what they're capable of technique-wise. That's your role as a teacher to facilitate that. So it's a very symbiotic relationship between the guest artist, the teacher, and the students. One concern people have about performing other styles of music is they're worried of what it might do to the student's ability to perform classic repertoire or classical technique. But I would argue that more is more in this case and not less. In other words, learning to play jazz on a violin will not diminish a student's ability to play classical music on the violin. In fact, if anything, it will enhance their ability to play classical music because they will learn new techniques, new approaches to performing music. In particular, improvising and composing music leads to a deeper understanding of the differences between the styles and allows the students to do more in both cases. So learning in multiple styles can enhance the ability to perform in all the styles. When exploring a new style of music, I encourage you to choose good tunes. In other words, choose those tunes that are representative of the style and tunes that are commonly found or styles that are commonly found, like certain dance styles are inherent to certain styles of music. The songs that you choose for the students to perform will represent your curricular choices for that unit that you're teaching them. So you want to think carefully about that. The best pieces to choose in the style are the ones that the expert players are probably most tired of performing. But since your students are unfamiliar with the style, these are the best tunes to start with because they're the ones that will give a broad overview of the style before they get into more complex or esoteric songs. And you also, along with the learning in the classroom, you want to encourage observing live performances, listening to audio and video recordings, watching video recordings, and using it in your teaching as well, so they hear the styles being played authentically. The other thing, you cannot teach everything about any one style. But the great thing about this is it will leave your students wanting to learn more about these styles. So if you give a really nice introduction unit with your students in a particular style, often this will lead them to explore the style more beyond the classroom. You'll be surprised actually at how your students will become experts in some of these styles that they hadn't even heard about before until you introduced it in your classroom. You can encourage them to do this by encouraging them to take private lessons on other instruments that are inherent in that style. In other words, a violinist can take lessons from a jazz saxophone player and learn about the genre without worrying about the technique. You should also encourage them to attend concerts and attend jam sessions when they're available in your area. You'll find by encouraging this that students will often seek out more knowledge and experience after your initiation of the style. So to wrap up, I'd like to encourage you to explore different styles of music within your traditional instrumental ensembles. You should choose styles that are meaningful to you or are meaningful to your students or your community. You should start small, choose one style that you're interested in exploring. This is a process. It takes time to learn about it, but learning along with the students will be beneficial to you and the students. These shared musical experiences will help your students become part of a community of creative musicians, and they will in turn influence their musical participation both in their future and in future generations as well. Thank you.
All right. All right. So you all have shared some of this before in our many other discussions, but apologies if you will just remind me here today. Have any of you participated in ensembles that were not band, choir, orchestra? Have any of you participated in things we'd consider kind of eclectic ensembles? Not really, huh? Maybe Sarah?
Would an a cappella group count, or is that still like a choir?
It counts. Sure, why not? If you feel like it fits in that category, then sure. And I would agree. There's all kinds of like jazz. Is jazz really an eclectic? Like jazz in a lot of places, jazz is really mainstream, right? Especially at UNC, right? Like, jazz is just part of what we do. So jazz doesn't feel like an other ensemble. It feels like part of what we do. And I think choir has a lot of those too, where a cappella groups or show choirs or things like that sometimes they're seen as kind of a separate thing, and sometimes they're just part of the program and part of what's going on. So I understand your kind of hesitancy there. Um, I know you all have seen some of these ensembles in action, but you haven't played in them. It sounds like somebody had guitar in there. Was that Cheyenne maybe that had guitar programming your school and some things like that? Okay. Good. So I also want to talk for a second about this word eclectic. I don't think I've given my spiel about eclectic in this class yet, have I? Okay. um, do you have any thoughts on why he and I like to use the word eclectic when we're referring to these ensembles? I know it's a really broad question, but when we're referring to these non-band choir orchestra ensembles, why might the word eclectic be a word I like? Let me start here instead. What are some other words you might use there? If you were trying to refer to a cappella groups, show choirs, jazz bands, marimba ensembles, mariachi groups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are some other words you might use to refer to those ensembles? Too much for Friday morning, huh? If you had to go talk with an administrator about you wanted to start a mariachi group and an iPad ensemble, would you, is there any way that you would refer to those, designating them as separate from your traditional class ensembles?
The only word that comes to my mind is modern, but I don't know if that would work.
Yeah, and for what did I just say? Acapella and iPad or whatever. For some of them, I think that works really, really well. If I toss in, hey, you could do an early music ensemble. Now modern doesn't fit quite as well, right? But modern could work for sure in some instances. Any other words that come to mind, what you might refer to those ensembles as?
I guess the only thing I've heard them called is just small ensembles, just anything that's not the traditional three.
Yeah, good. Because they are typically smaller than the big three, as I say, right? They are typically smaller. They don't have to be, right? A lot of those could be very large ensembles. And especially if we're going to include like show choir in that, very often those are very large ensembles. But definitely, Tyler, I've heard them referred to that way. Good. Anything else?
I also just thought of the word alternate.
Yes, that's one that was kind of the buzzword for a while, and you'll still hear it in a number of places. Alternative ensembles, right? Alternative ensembles was a very popular term. Good. So alternative ensembles, some teachers will just call them other, the other ensembles. Um, I think trying to ask this question, I think, is too broad. So I think I'm just going to tell you, and then you can tell me whether you like this or not, or what your thoughts are on this. My concerns with alternative are that it makes it sound like it's an alternative to the right way. And this is very much semantics, right? So you have every right to disagree with me. You might not think of those words in that way, in the same way that I do. But when I hear alternative, to me it sounds like an alternative to the main way or an alternative to the right way. And that makes me hesitant, as you can tell, because they're not an alternative to the right way. They are just another way of making music. It's still just as valid. It's still just as important. It should still be just as mainstream or as supported as the big three, in my opinion. And so I don't want to put any nomenclature on it that makes it feel like it is other or it is separate. I want it to be part of what's going on in my musical community and my musical curriculum. When I was teaching high school, like it was all part of our arts program and our arts offerings and that kind of stuff. And that's why I like the word eclectic. Eclectic means encompassing everything, right? When you have an eclectic style, if you think architecture is where that word very often gets used, eclectic architecture uses architecture from multiple periods of time, right? And multiple stylistic elements that get used. And so if you have an eclectic approach to your curriculum or eclectic ensembles that are offered, that also encompasses, or should, the classical Western canon of music. It makes everything part of your program and part of what's going on, the way that I try to use that word and the way that I think of that word. So it means that my mariachi ensemble and my traditional orchestra and my pops orchestra and my fiddle ensemble, right? Give me another one. My fiddle ensemble are all a part of my eclectic curriculum and eclectic offerings that I offer to my students. So that's where that word kind of comes from and why I like that word. And ask me in 5 to 10 years, and maybe we'll have found an even better one, right? Because those meanings just kind of change over time. But that's why I use that word, and that's why Dr. Gardner used that word. Any of you have thoughts or questions on eclectic versus a different word and how you might refer to all of these ensembles? All right, just wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to ask further about that. It's picky, right? It's very picky, thinking that carefully about the verbiage you use, but sometimes that becomes really important. And to administrators also, making sure that they know that this is not an alternative ensemble that can just be gotten rid of, but it is a part of my eclectic curriculum to offer a fiddle ensemble or whatever the case might be there. What were my other questions for you? We're gonna watch a couple more short videos, very short videos that are actually examples of some of these types of ensembles. But I'm curious, before we go to that, do you have any thoughts so far on just eclectic ensembles and everything Dr. Gardner was talking about in that video, opening it back up more broadly again, things that he mentioned in that video that were intriguing to you, things that might be a little nerve-wracking to you, anything that he brought up about eclectic ensembles that kind of stuck out to you?
I always think it's interesting to like discuss, like he said that the most popular like pieces in a certain style are probably the ones that like your more advanced students are tired of playing. And I think that's always interesting to look at because as a classical vocalist, I hate performing classical stuff. It is so boring. I hate just like, because oh wow, you can tell already. I talk like this. Okay. And so when I have to stand there and sing like this, I hate it. And so I think it's great that somebody recognizes that like different students are going to be, I mean, obviously we know this, but like different students are going to be more inclined and like drawn to different styles. Because like obviously like I mean I know you can be expressive to a certain extent with stylistic or classical stuff, but like I can't move when I sing as much as I would like.
I also thought it was interesting that he was talking about jamming as being a good moment to really learn. And I've always been so envious of instrumentalists and the fact that they can all just sit down and be like, all right, let's just make something up. Because with vocalists, it's really difficult to do that unless you have like a bass line or like chord progression that you already are thinking of in your head. And then it always just ends up being some other song that you know because you got to throw words in there as well. But with instrumentalists, y'all can just like sit down and be like, we're playing an E major, let's do this. And then you can come up with something really cool. And I wish that it was easier for vocalists to do that because it is such a cool thing and a really good learning experience for like improvisation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I hope you might get a chance to do something with some of our jazz vocal folks, because I think they'd have some good ideas and opinions on all of that too. Good. Anything else?
I guess I really appreciated how he talked about how, as the teacher, you shouldn't be the expert on all these topics. You should be willing to learn new topics as well. And I do also like how he emphasized bringing in guests. And when you bring in a guest, you are also, in a way, a student to that guest. And you should as a teacher, you should be doing everything you can to learn and expand your current knowledge, because just one person can't know every single thing there is to know about music. So there's always something new to learn, or some new style, or technique that you can be introduced.
For sure. I mean, just like history class, right? Yay, we get a kitty. um, just like history class, right? There's more history happening every single year, right? I mean, the longer that the world exists, the more and more history we have. The same is true of music. We get new music every single day, right? We get new forms of music that come out, and whether they're all types of music that you want to incorporate in your classroom or not is another discussion. But the fact that there is always new music coming out, and you can't possibly be an expert in all of it forever, right? we just can't. So relying on other folks who that is their primary type of music, genre of music, culture of music, and then having them, inviting them into your classroom, and being a student, as you say, Tyler, and you as the teacher also learning from them is a really valuable thing. He kind of mentions this, there are a lot of teachers who get really nervous about trying to do genres in their classroom, in their music classroom, that they don't know much about, because one, they just feel nervous to try and teach that. It's not their primary mode of music making, right? So they're nervous about that. And then two, many of them are also nervous, because they don't want to teach their students wrong, or they're worried about putting the wrong impression on their students about that genre. I am not a jazzer, right? And I definitely experienced this as a high school orchestra director. I was really scared to try and do anything jazz related with my students, because I didn't want it to go badly and then have them have a negative impression of jazz. Right. I was really nervous about me being the reason why they might grow up hating jazz, right? As if I had that much power, right? But that was one of my fears. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I've talked with a lot of teachers who feel that same way, whether it's jazz or whether it's another genre. They're very concerned about the experiences they're giving their students and making sure they are as authentic, as he said, as possible. There comes a point where you just have to swallow a little bit of that pride, I think. And I eventually got to this point where I was able to just swallow some of that pride and say to my students, hey, I'm not a jazzer, but jazz is an incredibly important American musical style, and you need to know some of it, and we need to experience this together. And so I'm not an expert. I will be learning some along with you. I know some, right? I do know some of what's going on, but also I'm going to be learning with you. But this is an important thing for you to know about and for you to experience as a musician on any instrument. It's an important thing for you to experience. And I did the same thing with fiddle music, because as string players, they need to know at least a little bit about fiddle music. But I was not a fiddler growing up. So I had to do some learning, and then some also just swallowing my ego and saying, we're going to dive into this together, right? And be able to try and learn together. And I think he does a pretty good job too of kind of explaining some of those things. This all comes back also to, I'm pretty sure I've said this in this class before, in 4 years at UNC, we can't possibly teach you everything that you will need to know when you go out and get your own classroom. And I think this is one of the areas in particular where that shows up a lot. We don't have a mariachi class, right? We don't have, you have jazz classes that you have to take, but maybe not as many as you might need for whatever your job ends up being. And our vocalists do not have to take a jazz class. Our vocalists don't have to take any vocal jazz. You do take the jazz methods course, but it tends to be more instrumental focused. So anyway, I digress. It is important to think about eclectic ensembles and eclectic styles and how that might play out in your future classrooms, recognizing that there is value there, and particularly depending on the community you land in, there might be a real need for an eclectic style that you did not receive any training on while you were at UNC. And so then what do you do? And the idea of using guest artists, of course, you can look for physical resources like books and repertoire and things like that that are designed to help you as the teacher. And I think I've mentioned before, conferences. This is one of the big benefits of CMEA or ACDA or CBA or ASTA, or, pick your alphabet soup. But all of those different professional organizations help with this. This is part of why those organizations exist, because all of them, all the ones I just rattled off, have sessions at those annual conferences related to exactly this. How do I start a mariachi ensemble? How do I start an a cappella choir? Those type of things to support teachers who didn't get this training in undergrad or in any years after undergrad. So that was more rambling than I meant to do kind of about that. Let's jump into a couple videos, and then I might ask you a few more follow-up questions. Any other thoughts or questions that arose as I was rambling there? Just want to give you a chance if anything else came to mind. Cool. All right, so let's watch a couple of these videos. So I'm going to bring up a list of videos, and whoever shouts one out first or types it in the chat first, I suppose that means I need to bring up the chat, is the first one we'll watch. So here's a list of ensembles. What do you want to do first?
Rock band.
All right, rock band.
Somebody looking on the outside would say, well, you need notation to teach that, or you need you have to have a one-on-one private instruction for the student to be focused. But what I'm really discovering about this modern band phenomenon is that you can have multiple things going on and trust students to work alone and build their skill.
A part of them naming the band Ownage had to do with they take ownership of what they do. And we like to say that things around here are a derocracy.
My middle school music teacher. He encouraged me to write more songs to express myself. And Daddy, I lost you when I
All right, so there's a little bit of that one. Let's watch a couple and then we'll kind of come back to talk about some of them. Zoom bar, go away. There we go. What you want to do next?
The steel drum band.
Steel drum band.
To support local restaurants, we've been to every city, including Little Rock.
And even Worcester. And tonight, I'll be eating the chicken quesadilla from Tony's Tex-Mex in Katy. Do you think they bought it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it takes them a little while to get going. Let me do it. what's next?
I think just because you talked about Sarah, go.
Oh, I was saying it's Tyler's turn to choose.
I was thinking we should do African drumming.
All right, let's do. Whoops, what did I even click on? African drumming.
The Department of Education's Division of Virgin Gift Hill School and Guy H. Benjamin, such as the cultural series at Cinnamon Bay Campground.
There we go. All right, let me stop there for a minute. As I'm watching time fly by, right, as it always does in class here. So things that you saw that you liked, or any thoughts that you have after watching a couple of those videos?
I noticed that with every single ensemble, they were all engaged in doing something and like playing an instrument, but they all like were individual because they all had their own part. And then in the rock band, they were able to come up with their own names for their bands, which I thought was cool. At the summer camp I teach at, we actually have a rock band class, and they do literally the exact same thing where they have their own little bands. And it's really cool to see them like walk up and see one little group working on their song and see where they're at and go to the next one. And they're just having fun, and they're going to remember it forever.
Excellent. Other observations?
When we were watching the steel drum band one, I really liked watching that. The only, like, the biggest thing that popped into my head, and this is like not like a bad thing, but imagine, you know, like one of those kids really, really likes the steel drum, and they go into music ed and they're like, "What's your primary instrument?" And they're like, "The steel drum."
We talk about that more often than you might think, Sarah, with students who have such passion for music and such potential to be amazing music teachers, but we have these giant roadblocks and gates, right, in schools of music, that you have to play one of the instruments that fits in our studios. And as Tyler has brought up before, with more and more students using digital audio workstations as an instrument, right, like that is how they make music and can make that happen. And that is so valid. But we don't have a DAW studio, right? Like that's not a studio you can be in. So yes, these are conversations we actually have a lot, at least some of us, on the faculty, of how do we handle, again, that changing landscape of music and ways that we need to be more open to some of those things that are going on. Yes, you're exactly right. God bless that student. We need to switch them over to, you know, some percussion instrument, probably, right? Is what our current solution would be. And that's not the right solution, but it's the way we would help them get in the door, is we'd put them on some other percussion instrument that could get them through an audition. So yeah. Any other observations or thoughts from those videos?
I guess I did one thing I did like about that African drumming section is just watching the rehearsal. It feels a little more, you know, less formal, more of a jam scenario, and it's it's a really good way to get you, especially younger students, comfortable with jamming, because there's not a lot of, you know, notation or anything involved. It's just rhythm. And like if you can get them started experimenting with just rhythm, that really lays the groundwork for them to branch out. And if they, you know, whenever they learn another instrument, they can branch out and start jamming and experimenting with that as well.
Yeah, yeah. You guys did a really nice job of, just by chance, I think, choosing one example that was elementary, one that was middle school, and one that was high school, right? Which helps to illustrate these types of ensembles can happen at all different age levels. I think that's one of the big advantages of them, is they can be adapted to work at any different age level and reach all different kinds of students, which is really cool and really important. So looking at our time, I do need to let you all move on with your day for next week. And I will update the Canvas page to say this. You already have week 11 up. Haha, novel idea that I already got that up, but I will add a few links to it. The videos that we didn't have a chance to watch today, if you could click on a couple of those and look at some of those other eclectic ensembles, we will start next week with just a little bit more eclectic ensemble discussion. I have just a couple other points I'd like us to chat about. So we will wrap up eclectic ensembles next week, and then we will move into curriculum and standards. Woohoo! And having a little idea of what that looks like in your future worlds and that kind of stuff. So and I didn't come back to the assignments, so we'll just have to kind of hold off on that because I'm not going to hold you over longer. But if you look through this week's module, you'll see, hopefully you have a first draft of your philosophy ready to turn in by 11:59 p.m. tonight. If you do not, please send me an email and let me know what's going on, and we can adjust that if we need to. But I'd love for you to get that first draft in so that I have time to comment on it and help you out before the final. And also listed is the assignment for your autobiography, which is not due until April 16. So you've got some time on that one, but I wanted us to look at that assignment today, and we're not going to get to it together, but maybe read over it on your own, and then we'll talk about it a little more next week. If anybody has questions, feel free to hang out. Otherwise, I hope you get some rest this weekend, and I will see you next week. Thanks, folks.